When we create a model for planning, we can base it on data from a cloud application, on-premise data source, or local file, or we can create a blank model, which lets us define all our accounts and dimensions from scratch. Once the model is created, we can either import or manually enter data into it. Blank models are enabled for planning by default. We can change this setting in the model preferences to create an analytic model instead. Initially, planning models contain two dimensions, version and date. In the version dimension, a single version exists by default to hold our actuals data. Other versions will be added to the dimension when we import or enter and save data in other data categories, such as budget, planning, forecast, or rolling forecast. Refer to the video on managing data category versions and publishing changes for more details. Now we'll return to the list of dimensions. In the date dimension, we can set the time granularity we want: year, quarter, month, or day. This determines the smallest increment on which we can plan. Here, we'll use the default setting of month. We can also choose the default time hierarchy we want to use. We'll use the default value again. There are additional date options that we can adjust in the model preferences, which we can access from the toolbar or from here. If we need to work with a fiscal year that doesn't match the calendar year, we can enable the fiscal year option, set when it starts, name the year based on the calendar year in which it starts or the year in which it ends, and choose whether to display fiscal periods as months or periods. In this example, we won't use the fiscal year option. On the Planning and Time Range tab, we need to set the earliest date we want the model to include, and choose how far into the future we want to plan. On the Currency tab, we can change the model's currency from the default of USD if appropriate. If we want to import values in different local currencies and convert them to the model's default currency, we also need to enable currency conversion. Refer to the video on model currency settings for details. Note that we can't turn on currency conversion until the model contains a dimension that indicates the currencies we'll be importing. Now we're ready to add more dimensions to the model. We can add new dimensions to create them from scratch, or select existing public dimensions that are already being used by other models. Here, we'll add a new dimension. By default, we're set to create the account dimension first. This is the dimension that will contain all the accounts or measures in our model. We have the option to make the dimension public, which will let us reuse it in other models. Keep in mind that when we import data into the model, the process to update master data, such as adding new dimension members, is different for public dimensions than for other dimensions, because any changes can affect multiple models. Refer to the video on importing master data to a public dimension for more details. In this example, we won't make the dimension public. Initially, the dimension is empty. We need to select it and add new members. We can add new members one by one, defining them in the Member Details panel, or switch from the list view to the grid view, where the details also display as a series of columns, and we can enter or paste values in the cells. Here, we'll start in the list view and define the first members step by step. First, we need to enter the member ID and description of the member. We can think of the IDs as the account number in our source data, and the description as the name or purpose of the account. The hierarchy of the account is the set of parent-child relationships between the account members. In the hierarchy area, we need to enter the ID of the member's parent account. In this case, finance is the top level of the hierarchy, so it doesn't have a parent member. We also don't want the finance member to display any values, so we don't need to enter any more member details for it. Now we'll create the next account member, operating income. We'll enter an ID and description. Before we can define the hierarchy, we need to save the model. Now we can select the finance member as the parent for the operating income member. To get a better overview of the account hierarchy structure, we'll switch to the grid view and enter details for all the other members of the account dimension. Now we'll switch from the member details to the dimension settings and look at the full account hierarchy. The finance member displays at the top of the structure. To see the full structure, we can open the action menu and choose to expand all children. Here, we can drag and drop items in the hierarchy to change their order. When we view this hierarchy in stories, we can drill down from the parent level to see the values for the children, and we can drill up from a child member to see the value for the parent. Now we'll continue looking at the account member details. We can use formulas to define account members for which values are calculated from the values of other accounts, rather than being imported or entered directly. In this model, formulas are used to create some key performance indicators, such as gross margin percentage. In the formula editor, we can see that the gross margin is calculated by dividing gross profit by net revenue. Refer to the video on working with formulas and variables for more details. We can optionally define the account type for each account. The account type indicates whether the values are to be treated as positive, such as an income account or an asset, or negative, such as an expense or a liability. We can also define a member as non-financial, such as headcount. If values for the account member are all stored as positive values in the data source, regardless of whether they reflect income or expenses, we need to specify the account types here to ensure the calculations are performed correctly. In the aggregation type column, we can determine how and if the numeric values are aggregated in the hierarchy. By default, the aggregation type is sum, even if we leave the value blank. Refer to the video on aggregation for more details on the other aggregation types and how to work with exception aggregation. In some cases, we may want to set certain dimensions as required in a chart or table before calculations for the account member can be performed. Refer to the video on required dimensions for more details. Using the scale, decimal places, and units and currency columns, we can control how values display in stories. We can apply scaling to make numbers easier to read. For example, if the values we typically work with are in tens or hundreds of millions, we might prefer to see the number scaled to millions rather than the full number. There's also an option to display values as percentages when appropriate. We can also choose the number of decimal places we want to display. The default value is 2. Combined with our scale setting of million, this means we would see values like 10.62 million. Next, we can indicate whether to display the value as a currency or using some other unit we can specify, such as employees. We also have the option to add thresholds for an account member, allowing us to define ranges that classify values as OK, warning, or critical. Refer to the video on model thresholds for details. Finally, we have the option to hide the account member in stories without affecting the accuracy of calculations that include the member. This lets us show the values for only the most significant account members if we want. Now we're ready to add another dimension. We'll leave the account dimension and add a region dimension. We'll set the type as organization. Planning models need to have an organization dimension where we can specify the currency and person responsible for each dimension member. Note that organization and generic dimensions in planning models need an unassigned member to support planning features, so we need to make sure we keep this member. Now we'll add the dimension members and their descriptions. Next, we'll add a hierarchy to the dimension. Refer to the video on creating hierarchies for details. In the currency column, we'll enter the currency in which we'll import the values for each member. Keep in mind that if we want to convert these local currencies into a single currency in Stories, we need to enable currency conversion in the model settings. Managing model currency settings and working with currency conversion tables are covered in separate videos. Finally, in the Person Responsible column, we can specify the default user to assign input tasks associated with that member. For example, here we can make a separate user responsible for each region if we want. Refer to the video on input tasks for details. Now we'll add one more dimension before saving our model, this time to capture our product information. In this case, we'll create a generic dimension. We'll add a hierarchy and enter the dimension members and their details. Finally, we'll save the model. Now that the model is complete, we can enable currency conversion if we want and import data into the model. We'll do these in separate videos. Thanks for watching.